free up the people to go and get something to eat and to live a normal life again. There's nothing for them to find down there. They're wasting time.
He says he hasn't been in Tivoli Gardens since 2005, but Mr. Siaga says once the state of emergency has ended, he will visit the area. Now, meanwhile, Information Minister Darrell Vaz has reacted swiftly to Mr. Siaga's comments.
That his comments are emotive comments, and I would not like to get into a debate in relation to whether they're accurate or they're not accurate. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion, and I would just say that it is a very emotional time for people that are closely associated with Tivoli Gardens. As we all know, he has been for 40 years, and therefore I would prefer to just say that that I would categorize them as emotive comments.
73 civilians were killed in the upheaval in downtown Kingston and its environs, as reported in the government's latest press briefing. But as we hear from Fabia Phillips-Lawrence, there is still discrepancy over the number of weapons recovered and the bodies piling up at the morgue.
One of the main questions on everyone's mind is how many persons were really killed in the operation. So far, the official count from the government is 73 civilians and 3 law enforcers. The police are also querying whether 6 of the civilians came from West Kingston. Some still argue, though, that the figures quoted are not adding up. 26 civilians were reported injured and 28 from the security forces. The weapons count has risen by 2. It's now 4 rifles and 2 pistols reportedly recovered. When questioned about the matter, the police pointed to the 8,000 rounds of ammunition they say were seized in the operation.
7,000 rounds can be equated to a minimum of 7,000 Jamaican lives. And by any scale, any operation that recovers 7,000 illegal rounds is worth an effort.
But it seems it will take more time to convince the public that more of a shootout took place instead of shootings.
And a number of buildings have been searched, and there are still some others to be searched.
An independent investigation is now to be held into the joint police military operation, and the permanent residence of the public defender is to be established,
which will be staffed and all resources made available for them to be located and housed and officed in the communities themselves, to allow for citizens to have easy access to make reports, complaints, and also get information.
But in the meantime, 560 persons are being processed by the police, mostly men. Checks are being made to see if they are wanted for any offenses. And now then, a series of press conferences has been held to update both the local and international media on what has been taking place in the West Kingston communities and its environs. But yet still, no dollar figure has been placed on this massive operation. Reporting for CVM News, I'm Fabia Phillips-Lawrence.
Thanks, Fabia. Now, meanwhile, human rights group Amnesty International is calling for a thorough investigation into the deaths of dozens of people during the West Kingston operation. Deputy Director of Amnesty International's Americas program, Kerry Howard, said while the Jamaican police have a duty to maintain law and order, the attribution of extraordinary powers to the security forces may lead to human rights violations. Amnesty also points to what it says is the small number of firearms seized compared with the number of people killed. The group is also concerned about reports that more than 500 people have been detained since the state of emergency was introduced. There's disbelief and a demand for answers in Upper Kirkland Heights, St. Andrew, after the early morning killing of 63-year-old Keith Clark during a joint police military operation believed to have been targeting Christopher Coke. Persons close to Mr. Clark are wondering how he could have been linked to the reputed Don, and they want a thorough investigation. Irvin Forbes has more.
Although it was warm in Red Hills Thursday in daylight, it was red hot hours before. Here's a small sample of what resounded through the hills.
So strange people come in, you're going to see them a call up on your phone and ask if you know the vehicle, if you know. You understand? No strange people can't come in here. So this is supposed to happen in that era here. I can't believe it. Come like me there Vietnam. The way they shot them and the bomb them a drop. Come like a Vietnam with them. I couldn't believe it's already it's me there.
Residents estimate the gunfire lasted over an hour and they expected numerous fatalities. But in the end, Keith Clark, a partner in an accounting firm, was the only confirmed death. His wife and one of his daughters were said to be in the house at the time. Another daughter, as well as a nephew and sisters-in-law, later arrived, but soldiers prevented them from going near the house. His brother, Claude Clark, a former cabinet minister in the Michael Manley administration, was said to be overseas, as distant as the flow of information at the scene. Up to mid-morning, the only official information coming out was a 4-sentence release from the Constabulary Communication Network. 2 of those sentences tell us that 4 members of the JDF were shot and injured in the operation, and 1 civilian killed. 1 firearm was recovered during the incident. It's this kind of lack of information up to that point that has angered many relatives and neighbors. Mr. Clark was a licensed firearm holder. The JDF later sent out the same news release, and Acting Deputy Commissioner Glenmore Hines, at a subsequent news briefing, repeated the same information, but briefly answered whether Mr. Clark was really killed in the search for Christopher Coke.
What is not very well known, there are several operations being conducted across Jamaica in support of the main effort.
We observed the team from the funeral home leaving the scene while we were there and then heading back in the same direction as we left, but they were giving no information. Mr. Clark had lived at his address for 30 years. His member of parliament, while not personally acquainted, had a concern.
You would think that if the security forces came to your house, that you would be advised and you'd be asked to come out of your house. So it raises a lot of questions, and given the background of the number of persons who have been killed in Tivoli, in relation to the number of guns that have been found, it is a worrying trend that seems to be taking place, and I'm waiting for some answers, because people have been given authority and power, and they will have to be held accountable for how they have used that.
Many now await the findings of the Bureau of Special Investigation. Irvin Forbes, CVM News.
Opposition spokesman on national security Peter Bunting is keeping alive what he terms government's mishandling of the extradition process, which resulted in the carnage and escalation in violence in the corporate area. As Kingsley Roberts tells us, he also thinks the criminals were tipped off.
Nearly 75 confirmed deaths in the West Kingston area and counting, and opposition spokesman on national security Peter Bunting is pointing to what he terms an error in judgment on the part of the ruling JLP. He feels their handling of the process exacerbated the situation, culminating in a deadly standoff and dozens of fatalities. Mr. Bunting thinks the government bungled from the very beginning and divulged too much information.
The PNP would not have resisted this request for extradition. It would have gone the normal process where the whole thing would have been secret from the receipt of a request for extradition up to the issuing of the warrant for arrest. That whole process is normally done entirely in secret, so that the subject of the extradition would not be alerted to the fact that an arrest warrant is coming for them.
He believes efforts to block the extradition on the grounds that the evidence was obtained illegally made matters worse.
If the government had sent it through the normal channels, then it could have kept secret. But because they resisted it, and in the course of their finding, whatever excuses they were coming up with, the matter came to the attention of the media, and the U.S. grand jury indictment was unsealed.
Mr. Bunting also thinks the 9-month delay allowed for tremendous preparation, planning and fortification on the part of criminals to counter the operation by the security forces. Prime Minister Golding's address regarding the signing of the extradition documents, he feels, was unwise.
Even up to the time when the Prime Minister spoke, again he telegraphed that we have now decided that sometime in the future the Justice Minister will sign the authority to proceed. Again, I don't think it was useful to telegraph, and it would have been better to have let, even at that 11th hour, the warrant be issued in secret, so that the preparations now could not have gone